Okay, so yesterday we were discussing about this embryology part, or rather the evidences from the embryology section, especially with respect to the type of biological evolution that is happening. And we had discussed about these temporary embryonic structures and the development of the vertebral organs, plus how the embryo looks similar in different organisms. So that is all we had discussed. Now the small aspect of this retrogressive metamorphosis. Retrogressive means kind of going backward, and metamorphosis is change in the like drastic change in the organism in very simplest term. So there is this saculina, which is a parasitic crustacean. This is like a crust, the organisms with hard covering on the top. That's what is this crustacean that lives on the ectoparasite on crab. Ecto means outside and living as a parasite. So the adult has a sac-like body, but the larva resembles to the other species, which is Nauplius larva. So I guess I have it somewhere. Uh, this one is, yeah. So if you look now, though the diagram looks very complicated, if you look at these structures, right? This is Herdemania, which is another species, which is a kind of an Ascidian. Ascidian is one type within the chordate phylum. And again, the same thing there that occurs is that the Herdmania, it possesses all the three chordate characters, specifically the dorsal supporting rod, that is the notochord, the gill slits, and the dorsal nerve cord. So these are the very typical characteristic of the chordate category. So these are present, and the adult version of this has a purse-like or a pouch-like body with no chordate characters. So in short, what this point wants to say is, though the organisms, they are at the larval stage, they are something else, and the adult stage they are totally different, and they look like some other organisms in the larval stage. So that is another evidence in these two cases of the Saculian and Headmania, that they appear evolutionarily closer to each other. So, like same is the case with here what we had seen in terms of embryo, because these embryos they look similar to each other. That's when we concluded that these organisms they might be evolutionarily related to each other. So same thing is being said in this retrogressive metamorphosis, but just in the context of what we said, that it's the larva is looking similar to something else, and the adult has totally different structure. Again, these diagrams I have deliberately put, like if you look at this particular organism, this is the adult and this one is the larva, right? Even in these cases, these two, this one is Nauplius and this one is the Saculina variant of it. So if you look at these two, they look quite similar, but these two are drastically different organs. You can see this A1, A2, M, these are the kind of appendages that they have, then a kind of mouth part and so on. But yeah, again, not going into these details. In short, just you need to remember the examples, that Saculina and Headmania as the part of retrogressive metamorphosis from the embryology section. Uh, Now, there have been very well proposed theories, what we know as recapitulation theory, and later on it became biogenetic law. This recapitulation theory was proposed by von Baer in somewhere 1828, and then it was revised as well as renamed as the biogenetic law by the Ernst Haeckel. And according to this theory, every living organism during its development, it either repeats or recapitulate again means repeats. So it's just very specific term with respect to something done intentionally, that is recapitulate. So living organisms, during its development repeats in an abbreviated form in the evolutionary history of its race. So what does this statement means is, like, even though the organism they are drastically different, they will repeat some stages which look like each other, and that is what will give the evolutionary history of its race. So that is what is this biogenetic law or recapitulation theory.
So,
Yes.
like, I didn't understand.
So
Every living organism does what?
So, like, it will repeat in an abbreviated form in the sense, the younger stages of the embryonic development, they will give more idea about the how the adult would be, or they will give also more idea about the which common ancestor they are coming from. So that is what, so which the part which we had already seen in terms of that embryonic development, and the embryos they look similar. So that is what is being said in this recapitulation theory.
So, if you look at the developing organism, you can say what's its ancestor.
In a way, yes.
But you might not be able to say the same if you look at the adult.
Yeah, correct.
Oh, okay.
And then there is this unnecessary gap in an abbreviated. Okay, so it also gives a statement. So this statement, this law or this theory gives this statement called as ontology recapitulates, which means repeats the phylogeny. Now, phylogeny is the ancestral history during its development, and ontogeny is the developmental history of an individual, means how the organism has developed from a zygote stage to the adult stage, that is ontogeny. And phylogeny is how these organisms they have came to this stage of whatever they having appendages, or they having particular brain, heart, whatsoever, whatever characteristic of that, how they have historically developed throughout the process of evolution. So an ontogeny, that is the development of an organism, repeats the development of the whole of the history, evolutionary history. And that is when the example of gill slits that we had seen. Like we know that it is not required in human, but we know in the earlier organism, like we have developed from the aquatic organism, smaller vertebrates. And if we are developed from them, we still have those characteristics. And that's when during the developmental stages, those gill slits, they are still found in the vertebrate. So that's what we had looked. So that is a direct indication of ontogeny recapitulates the phylogeny part. And this theory also gives certain examples here. For example, the larva of that herd minia has a chordate characters, but the adult does not have them. Now, this does not mean that, or rather, this literally means that there is some correlation with the other chordates of this organism. That means the evolutionarily closer ancestors will be there in the chordate animals or organisms. Then development of the frog includes a tadpole larva, which looks like a fish. If you have ever seen a small tadpole, it looks like a fish. Is an aquatic form, and the frog itself is like amphibian. It's not completely aquatic, but it's rather amphibian. So again, this fish-like larva gives, which is a part of ontogeny, gives an idea about where the frog would have evolved from. So that means frog would have evolved from a fish-like organism, right? So that's the indirect, rather the direct meaning of it. Gymnosperms, they are not dependent on water for fertilization. Gymnosperm are those non-fruit bearing plants. So these gymnosperms, they are not dependent on water for fertilization, but the flagellated sperms and their dependency on water for this is talking about the pteridophytes. So pteridophytes, like gymnosperms, we know that they don't need water for fertilization, because their sperms or whatever spores or whatever seeds or gametes in a way, they need not be carried by the water. So that's why they are not dependent. But in contrary, this pteridophytes, they require water for their fertilization, and they also have flagellated sperm, and that's where the flagella helps that movement of the gamete or the male gamete, which is called as sperm in pteridophytes. But that occurs in primitive gymnosperms like cycas. So within gymnosperm category, cycas is the most primitive species, and that has similarity with respect to the pteridophytes, which is your fern-like plants. And when they have similarity, that gives an idea about that these two species or organisms, they might be evolutionarily closer. And the last one, that the seedlings of acacia, they develop from they develop the simple leaves during the earlier stages of germination or development of the plant, and the compound leaves later. Now, the simple leaves, growth of the simple leaves is an indication of that the acacia would have evolved from some simpler species which existed prior to it. So that is another example. So that's when ontology recapitulates the phylogeny. So there are several such examples to prove this theory. I hope now this part is clear. Okay. Then the next within, so like again going back a little bit and talking about, then we were looking at the process of biogenesis and so on, and then we arrived at a conclusion that this whole of the process is the part of biological evolution. And then we started looking at the evidences. First one, we looked at the paleontology, then we looked at this embryology and so on. Now, within these subjects, anatomy and morphology also we looked at. So similarly, we are looking at these evidences from biogeographical distribution, taxonomy, and molecular biology. The reason I have kind of made it very crisp, because these are not so important. These are not even mentioned in the syllabus document. So I'm going to squeeze in this content and talk about it very briefly. So the with respect to the geographical distribution, this part we have already seen to some extent with respect to the land patterns, right? That was the how the land separated and how the flora and fauna on those particular separated lands became different. So that is what will be seen here as well. So the study of distribution of plants and animals in the space or on the earth's surface, that is what is called as biogeography. And specific, if it is the animal study, the distribution of animals, and that will be called as zoogeography. So this includes various points again: diversity, fauna and flora. Now we already know that the islands that exist nowadays, they were some days, or it's not some days, some million years ago, they were all together and then they got separated over the time. And these islands, they have different species. Now, even though they were together at one time point, but the species that they have or the fauna and flora that they have, these are drastically different. Why? Because they have adapted to those particular situation or the environment. Discontinuous distribution is one of the very typical example of this biogeographical distribution. Like for example, camels. Camels are very indigenous to the areas where there is kind of a deserted land, right? But there is something similar to camel-like species. I forgot, it's called, I guess, Ilama or something. Some species which looks like camel, that is found in the southern American uh, continent or that particular region. And like, though they look similar and they are living in drastically different land pattern. And if you look at the characteristic of these animals, shape wise, overall structure wise, they will look same. But the functionality wise, they are more different. So that is discontinuous distribution, and which also proves the point that at one time point these species would have been together and they evolved what they are currently into the different ones. Similarly, the alligators, they also have discontinuous distribution in terms of they will be found at different landscapes uh, at one particular time point. Then the continuous distribution, but at the same time there will be some organisms which have been surviving on all these different biogeographical areas, like for example rat, bat, cockroach, lizard, snake. You will find these organisms in most of the landscape, whether it's an island, whether it's like a temperate or hot weather or whatsoever. So they will be distributed across all the landscapes. And even there is this restricted distribution. Restricted distribution means they are found only in a specific area and nowhere else. That is again gives certain idea about maybe this particular species is evolved from the common one. For example, this egg-laying mammals or pouched mammals, like kangaroo is very famous example for that, which we know that it is very indigenous to the Australian subcontinent, right? So Australia, New Zealand, that part of the land. So that's a restricted distribution. You will not find them anywhere else apart from the zoological park and so on, but otherwise they are not found anywhere else. So that is the restricted distribution. So ultimately these things, they prove that though the landscape is different, the organisms might be present at different spaces, and they might have evolved over the time, but at one time point they had a common background, and that's
So,
yeah.
but like these are all the possibilities that can exist, right?
Sorry.
Like either an animal is found everywhere, either it's found in some places, some environments, or either it's found only at one place.
Correct.
Like there's no fourth option, right?
Yeah.
So like all of these, how can all of these prove evolution?
No, it's not all of these, but all of these together they are proving the evolution part. In the sense that, like that's when I said, like we have already seen that in terms of land patterns, that the land was together. Now it is highly impossible that a particular species which is surviving on that Galapagos Island, right, or anywhere else, any other part of the landscape, it will not evolve from scratch. It must have evolved from something else, right? So that is what it is trying to prove. And then these points of the continuous restricted, it is just showing that how the organisms they got biogeographically distributed over the time, over the
So it's not proving that, it's a characteristic of evolution, right?
correct. But then it's indirectly proving the same fact that being the characteristic, this is what we are proving.
No, I mean, if evolution exists, then these, I mean, like I don't, like, it's more related to geographical distribution, right? Like
Yes,
flora and fauna found in different, like, combinations. Like how is that related to evolution?
because it has adapted to particular landscape, no? That's what is the evolution.
Okay, so it's like rats have adapted everywhere, but camels have not.
Yeah,
Okay, so it's like a feature then.
yeah. And okay, so I hope that part is clear with respect to biogeography. The next evidence from taxonomy, this again we have studied very well. Like again in 9th and 11th, this whole chapter was there of taxonomy, where the Linnaeus, he had classified the organisms into groups, different groups, like what we call them as five kingdoms or so on. So these groups, they are based on the similarities or the differences. Similarity existed due to they had common ancestor, right? Or the differences they had due to the environmental adaptation. So based on that, these different organisms, they were classified. So that again is like common ancestry proves the point of like the evolution at one particular time point in the evolution process. These organisms, they were similar species or one species, depends. And differences, they exist because they have the landscape got distributed, the situations or the environmental conditions, they got different. So they have certain differences which is due to the environmental adaptation. So that is one of the evidence from the taxonomical perspective. And evidence from the molecular biology perspective, this again we have studied all of it in the last few chapters. So there is similarity at the basic molecular level in the chemical composition. That means whatever is the composition of the particular structure, let's say cell wall, there is some similarity there. The composition of any of the organelles, sorry, not the organelles, any of the molecules in terms of proteins, fats, carbohydrates. So that way the chemical composition of these molecules is pretty much similar. Like you take something from bacteria, let's say you take a glucose from bacteria and you take a glucose from human, drastically different species, but glucose will remain glucose, right? Or even if we take certain proteins, they are still similar. We had spoken of these uh, yeah, what evolutionarily conserved proteins. They have certain protein structures which are similar throughout the species. So that way it is kind of an evidence that it cannot happen that, or it will be a very less likely that same molecule which was present in the most primitive species is present in the most complex organism as well. So that is not like it ultimately proves that these organisms, they have evolved from one another. Similarly, with respect to genome, the genetic code is universal that we know of. Any organism you take, they will always have the same genetic code, same amino acid, and so on. Enzymes, if it is a lactase enzyme, it will always break down lactose. If it is a cellulase enzyme, it will always break down cellulose. So that way, these enzymes or dehydrogenase or carboxylase, so they have certain functions, and that's how they are like similar with each other, like from different organisms. Same is the case with hormones. Again, not all hormones, they are same. Like you may not find one particular hormone which is found in human in the other species, but to some extent they have certain similarity. Same is the case with blood proteins like albumin and globulin and the biochemical activities. For example, the photosynthesis and respiration. It's like kind of an evidence, the kind of molecule it takes and the kind of molecule it generates. So in these biochemical activities, that is same. So these are the various evidences with respect to the biological evolution from the molecular biology, taxonomy, and biogeography. Any question here?
So I had a question, but it's not directly related to this.
Say it.
So, like, I was thinking that since we've also evolved from some animals,
Hmm.
and we have like quite a few close relatives in the animal kingdom, why is it that only humans are smart? Like, they should also have at least half or at least 25% of the brain, right? Like maybe orangutans because they're so close, or other simians.
See, again, we are going back to the same discussion we had two days back or 3 days
No,
back.
no, I'm not talking about evolutionary evolved. I'm just talking about smart, like brain capacity.
But it's the same thing, ultimately, Pratham. It's
No,
like,
sir, it's not the same thing. I mean, IQ is defined for each animal, right?
but then, Miss, that is what I wanted to say even that day, or rather, I said it also, that we think we are smart.
So, like, if the ape was smart, then wouldn't the ape, you know, it would have built a skyscraper, right?
No, but then the definition of that smartness.
That's what I'm saying. IQ in particular.
Sorry.
Sir, IQ, sir, IQ. Like apes have something like one or two, right?
Yeah, see, again, it's like uh, this is kind of the environmental factors. So when this Homo species was evolved from the apes category, right? They have started using first fire and then wheel and then certain structures. Then they
Uh,
started
so
building.
like fire and all that. Uh, so it was pretty early. Like like in one of the first species, like
Right,
they did that.
correct.
So and at that time they were like very very close to apes, and they look like apes also when they used fire. But like modern apes, they don't use fire.
Yeah, but then that's what, like, if we go back from that particular point till now, it's a huge period. Plus and this cohabitation, uh, adapting to the situation which was more common with the Homo species and not with the ape species, right? So that will ultimately give you more and more like IQ in a way, because you are adapting to your environment. And most of the apes, have also adapted to their environment, but not to the extent that they could have.
So, but isn't the bridge too big between humans and other apes? Like that way.
But if you consider the development of the brain capacity, that's also huge.
Like, I mean, yeah, like why is that? The develop like why did humans develop brains so much and the other apes didn't? I mean, before they were almost the same, right?
But that's what is the adaptation, no? Environmental adaptation. Because you start doing cohabitation, you start doing things which are not conventional in the environmental aspect. Fire was not conventional then, or the development of the wheel structure, or transportation or movement from one place to the other. Those things, they were not common. So the moment you live in a, like, it's a simplest thing. If I tell you, you live in a small village and you travel all around the world, right? And just being even uneducated person, right? You don't know any language, you don't know anything, you just know how to speak, how to hear, and how to observe. Even if
No,
you,
so I mean the adaptation. So like it's too far. So like you see the different species of great apes. Like you see like orangutans, chimpanzees, gorillas, and stuff like that. So like they fall in different categories, right?
yeah.
So like the ones that are closer to us, those categories, which are further away from the other categories.
Huh?
Like gorilla is pretty far, but orangutan is pretty close to us.
Hmm.
So like even though orangutan and gorilla they are so far away and they are closer to us, like one of them, like all of them are the great apes, but they are categories, right? But still like their behavior is like more or less the same, right? I mean they have almost the same level of intelligence. They do stuff a bit differently, but generally living wise, there's no much of a difference. But like even though like the orangutan is closer to us, there's so much of a difference.
Correct, but then see, the point ultimately comes back to the exposure to the environment. How far a particular species has been exposed to what different kinds of situation, and how much is that exposure as well, that is also very important. And that is when that adaptation happens to a particular situation. So I guess that should be the same reason for development of the brain capacity from other species to the human. Hello.
Yes, sir. So like again, I was like one more thing. Like there are other animals that have like more folds in their brains, right? So they're supposed to be smarter, but they aren't.
So just having more folds does not mean they have more connecting neurons as well, right? It might be just what we call as the uh, the mass of the brain tissue. That does not mean they have always more connecting neuron. The reason why we have more developed brain is because our neurons, they keep connecting, they keep making new connections. So that is one reason. That may not be the same, or even in terms of size. Then if we think, most likely elephant's brain will be far more bigger than what we have, obviously.
Yes, so it also has more folds. It's also denser.
Exactly, but then is elephant more smarter than human?
So
No,
like it's
most likely.
supposed, so like theoretically it's supposed to be better, right? Because didn't they say that like the more folds that are there in the same area, the better you are.
Also, it's, you also look at the body. It's not just the brain then, right? Because see, we have developed in a way that we can do things in a very free manner. In terms of, if I have to pick up the food and eat, I can do it. I can run, I can walk. That's not the case with the elephant. I mean, of course, they can also run, walk, or do whatever they want. But the kind of ability of doing these things is not as free as it is in human. With respect to these animal, it's kind of restricted,
So you're saying that they're physically restricted.
physically restricted. And that's when, like, until and unless, so that is when we say, if we, until and unless we keep these creatures in the wild, they may not evolve to that great extent, because the humans, they have taken over now this world. I don't think any other species will evolve, because there will always be some human impact.
Yes, sir.
So in that respect, it will be very difficult for any particular, even tomorrow, imagine if elephant, down the line 1,000 years, uh, elephant is going to become a smarter animal, but then by then human will already be at another level, if at all both of these species survive, right? And in that case, that animal or that elephant will always be at lower level than the human in terms of his or its smartness. So I'm just guessing it. I don't know what will happen, but that's just a kind of wild guess, if we think along the lines. So that brain capacity, I assume it's more a part of adaptation. And that's when, like, if we look into the literature also, human species is the most adaptable species to this environment, and that is why it is prospering also. Had it been
So,
the,
but isn't it something like the cockroach or something? Like they're
yeah,
answering.
then the cockroach, in terms of evolution, they are not evolved completely, right?
Yeah,
So that is the difference in terms of like complexity of an organism. Human is far more complex, so that, and on that basis I'm saying they are highly evolved, not in terms of because they have some better characteristic. Maybe cockroach has some other better character that we don't know. Of course we know quite a few, but I'm just giving a hypothetical example. But in terms of complexity of the organism's development, human is most complex. So in, with that aspect, the then we, what was I saying, I forgot now. Why did I bring cockroach? No, why did you bring cockroach?
so like you said about adaptability about of humans,
Yeah,
that they have good adaptability.
yeah. So that is why, like, again, if you look at a particular species over, let's say 1 million years, and if you look at the human species for the same 1 million years, you will find human species would have drastically changed. But that particular species which we are talking, let's say even this insect category, they may not have evolved to that great extent, living in the same environment, having the same environmental factors, but the adaptation patterns, they are very, very different. So if these patterns are drastically different, it is quite obvious that human will develop into a more evolved organism.
Yes, sir.
I guess we should also read sometime about this adaptation theories. It is not part of the syllabus as such, but yeah, sometime we should at least watch or read or do something about it, because that's another interesting topic.
So, like, I
Yeah,
had one more question. Like, this is not related to the syllabus. Like, this is a quick thing. So, like, you studied embryology, right?
yeah, in a way.
Like earlier when you were studying.
Yeah.
So, like, where you studied, did they like make those embryos like try to grow embryos outside, or like some artificial ones, like extinct species? They kind of cut the DNA and they put it into some uterus and try to grow it there.
No, no. Like I said, we don't do these experiments so commonly. Until and unless you have your own lab, these kind of experiments, they always need ethical clearance. If it is not done, then it's not allowed to do it. So we haven't tried these experiments, but and I don't think so. So it's also like these experiments, most of the evolutionary biologists they might be doing that, taking certain samples, putting DNA from here to there, and then identifying it and so on. But in general, the biologist, uh, I haven't found any answer, or I don't know of any that they would be doing such research.
Okay.
But theoretically, yes. But also remember, there is always a, a disadvantage of doing these things. Like last class itself, we have seen it. Evolution is not reversible, right? So if you are trying to uh, get that dinosaur gene into some species and trying to recreate the whole species, that is very much possible, and people have tried those experiments, but then it has been banned. So that concept of the movie, what was that movie? uh, Jurassic Park, no?
No, 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 not Jurassic Park. So, like, I heard that like the woolly mammoth DNA, like they found it in some ice cup chunk, and like and some other animals also, and they put it in an elephant embryo, so that some broken nucleotides, it can match the element, the elephant car thing, the DNA it can match
Huh.
the machinery, and so they hope to produce a woolly mammoth and stuff.
But yeah, these kind of experiments, they are not like, they need lot of like studies also. Also in terms of, if you think just from the perspective of molecular biology, like even if you find a particular DNA sample, let's say, which codes for how that particular organism developed, it may or may not be compatible with the current system, in the sense that we don't know what kind of proteins, what kind of situation within a cell that was there earlier at those times, so that a particular gene was expressed or not expressed, you know, that way. And that's how the cell functioning occurs. It may or may not be possible to replicate those situations. Obviously there is a chance, possibility is there, that we can do the exactly same situation, simulation, what we call it. But that's still like kind of a rare type of experiments. If at all you people are interested in these things, you should go for research. You will find, I mean, you will find quite a lot more problems in doing these things than what I say. uh, yeah, but anyway, so I guess we can move forward. So the evidences from the molecular biology perspective, again in the lines of the biochemistry and physiology. So we know, we have discussed these things quite again in detail earlier, but just to the specifically pointing them out, in terms of molecular homology, most of the macromolecules like DNA, actin, tubulin like protein, they are common throughout. similarity in metabolic processes, like how the protein synthesis happen, how the synthesis of various organic molecule happens, like starch and glycogen or so on. Catabolism during respiration, how the glucose is broken down to generate energy. Most of these mechanisms, they are very much conserved. ATP is the energy currency throughout the living cells. Chlorophyll is the pigment which does photosynthesis. Again, all those species which are autotrophic. Cytochrome C is again common throughout the as an electron acceptor in the electron transport chain. That is the part of the energy generation process or the respiration process. Nitrogenous waste is again common throughout the all the organism. In birds, it goes out like uric acid. In vertebrate species or like in human, it goes out as urea. So, but ultimately, ammonia is toxic to the body and it goes out in the form of ammonium products. So that's still very much same. Blood groups, they are mostly same in most of the organism. It just in some organism, but certain antigens they are expressed more or less. Like we have A, B, and AB antigen, or absence of this will be O antigen. So that way we have these more expressed. Some organisms they might have some other antigen specifically more expressed. But blood group wise, like we have even seen there are different types of antigen, like MN antigen, which is present in human, and that is more prevalent in terms of ape category. So that way, blood group wise also we have quite a lot of similarity, and that again proves the fact that evolutionarily conserved nature of various organisms. So there is this one particular test uh, which is done for the blood proteins. It's called precipitation method, and this is specifically done to test the relationship between, like let's say we want to check the relation between monkey and a human being. So these are serological, that means serum based test by precipitation method. So what is done is you take a blood sample and you add what we call the blood proteins from one organism to the other. Like let's say we have human blood and we add monkey's serum protein into the human blood. If it is compatible to each other, that will now not give us any precipitate. But if it is not compatible, what did I say? If it is compatible in the sense, if it has like we have certain antigens, and if monkey also has similar blood group, they might have those antibodies, right? If those antibody antigen reaction will occur, we will find a precipitate. So that is a direct indication that these two species are related, because they have antigens and antibodies common to each other. Or if that particular sample is not forming any precipitate, that means these two species they have totally different blood proteins. So that way it will not show any precipitate. So that way,
Oh, but what if they have the same blood group?
so that's when it's not just one done with one particular antigen, no, it will be done with the all the antigens, all the possible antigens. And again, this is like now we know for most of these species, so this method is kind of obsolete now. It is not no more used, but
Okay, okay, so you don't add one blood group, you add all the blood groups of humans and you add all the blood groups of monkeys,
yeah,
and then
yeah,
they'll precipitate among each other.
all the possible combinations. So yeah, so that is the precipitation method of this, to identify the relationship between different organisms. 2022. Uh, yeah, so let's have a look at these evidences from cytology. Again, same thing, that means the cell biology part. Photosynthetic machinery is common, mitochondria is common, similarity in plasma membrane or the cell organelles, that is always there. Nucleus structure, chromosome structure, chromatin, DNA, common genetic code. So these are all again the other evidences which are found in different species, which again proves the biological evolutionary perspective. So I guess this should be the last. Yeah. So this was all about different types of evidences to prove that biological evolution occurs or has occurred. Now we will move into the different theories of evolution. So there are these four main theories. Lamarck's theory of inheritance of acquired characters, right? This is in a way this we what we call as adaptation, right? How a particular organism has acquired characters and how they are inherited. That is what is Lamarck's theory. It's called as Lamarckism. Darwin's theory is the theory of natural selection. It's called Darwinism. Then De Vries, this is like about the mutations or whatever changes have happened. That is third theory. And then there is the newest version of this theory is modern concept of evolution, which is also called as modern synthetic theory, or it's also called as neo-Darwinism. Neo is new, Darwinism. So appendix to that particular theory. Uh, these two, first one, Lamarckism and Darwinism, they have been removed from your syllabus. But I guess, so I will just show you that particular part. If you look here from the syllabus, so this Lamarckism is totally removed. Darwinism is totally removed. Neo-Darwinism is there in the syllabus. But in my opinion, if we don't understand a basic perspective of these theories, we will not be able to understand this. Means like what is the basis of going to this theory is lying in these two theories. So in brief, we will see these two theories and then we will move on to the Neo-Darwinism. But remember, for exam perspective, you don't have to study these two theories. It just for the understanding purpose, we are going to look at it. And I guess after these theories, we have very short topics which are left out from these, what we call this chapter, and we will be done with it. So let me see how much. Yeah, we can finish this particular theory, Lamarckism, because it's simpler one. So the theory of inheritance of acquired characters. This was proposed by this French guy called Lamarck. It was in 1809. So according to him, the changes in the structure or functions of any organ acquired during the life form or during the lifetime, it changes in response to the surrounding environment, and then they are inherited by its offspring and then keep on adding up over the period of time. So one generation will have certain change. Means one generation does not literally mean one generation, but the generation which has changed, that's what I mean. So those particular species, they will have certain change, their offsprings will have certain change, and this will go on accumulating over the time. That's what we call as the process of evolution. So that theory of inheritance of acquired characteristics speaks of how the characteristics are acquired due to the surrounding environment, and then these changes will lead to the new species. New species again does not literally mean it will be drastically different species. New species means it has certain modified characteristics than the earlier one. The postulates or the points within the Lamarckism, it talks of the new needs. So due to the changes in environment, it will create new needs in the living organism. And as a part of adaptation, they will have to adapt to those situations and they will change in their structure or function. So that is one point of the new needs. Then acquisition of these new characters can occur by use or by disuse. By use as in like certain organ has been used often and then it keeps on adapting over the time, right? For example, that wing structure in most of the birds that is there, or the fin structure within the fish, it has been used over the time. That's why they have evolved into what they are currently. Or for example, the opposite example of disuse, like the tailbone. In human, it has diminished. A particular organ which has not been used has diminished over the time. So that is also a part of evolution, which is use as well as disuse. And of course the effect of environment will provoke a certain changes in the organism that will lead to the acquisition of the new characters. And that is how these characters, these acquired characters, due to the change in the environment, they get inherited over the different species. So that is what the Lamarckism speaks about, and this is what I wanted to give brief. There are examples of this Lamarckism to support this theory. What we have already discussed in brief about this long neck in giraffe. Like over the time, the giraffe, which was, or this earlier version of the giraffe, whichever species it was a kind of grassland animal. But over the time, when the trees started growing and the grass started diminishing, they had to like they started stretching their forelimbs and the neck, and that's how the giraffe has a very long neck nowadays. Or loss of limbs in snakes. So that is another theory. We know that snakes are kind of, snakes have been evolved from the reptiles category, or the earlier reptilian species, which had four limbs. Now in snakes, they don't have these two of the or rather any of the limbs, not two of the limbs. So that's how, over the process of evolution, because they started crawling, for crawling there was no need of the limbs, and that way the limbs, they are lost over the time of evolution. Evolution of aquatic birds, again they have developed special like leg structure, in terms of having that what we call that, uh, between the phalanges, they have kind of flap like structure being developed, or a layer of tissue which is developed, so that it helps them floating and swimming in the water. So that's, and they are developed from the birds ultimately. So that is like whole of the evolution of the
No,
aquatic birds.
but isn't this the same as Darwin's theory?
No, Darwin's theory talks of natural selection more.
No, but this is also natural selection, right?
In a way, yes. But so that's when we are not looking into the much detailed aspects of these two theories. Otherwise, there is quite a lot of drastic differences between Lamarckism and Darwinism.
So, like the giraffe, if you take the giraffe, so let's say giraffe had a short neck, and like it's like the next generation of giraffes, like some may have short, like a bit shorter, and some may have a bit longer, like because of different mutations in each individual. So the longer ones survived and the shorter ones died because they couldn't eat the leaves on the tree.
Yeah,
Like,
correct.
and so because of natural selection, the giraffe's neck grew taller.
Right, but then at that time, maybe Lamarck did not knew of this part, which came into Darwinism theory.
Yes, sir. So like, I mean, it's the same thing, right? What I'm trying to say.
Yeah, but then chronologically, if you see, it will be little different, because half of the things which were not known will be added later in the next theory that comes up. So something like that.
So it was like an incomplete natural selection theory, Lamarckism.
I don't know if we can call so, but yeah, in a way, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So and then this last example of evolution of feet of modern horse and deer structures. Like earlier again, these have evolved from the terrestrial animals which had very short leg. But now these animals which have evolved, they are like very fast running animals. So that particular evolution is another example in support of this Lamarckism. So that's the brief about this Lamarckism. Next class we'll start with the Darwinism, and again we will look at a bit about the Darwin's history, and then we will continue from there into Neo-Darwinism. Okay, it's already 30.